Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for joining me for my review of the 1982 teen high school comedy classic Fast Times at Ridgemont High, directed by Amy Heckerling, written by Cameron Crowe, and starring Sean Penn and Jennifer Jason Leigh. So, this film, in my opinion, is a little bit under the radar. It is considered a classic to some, but it seems like when you hear about great teen high school comedies, you hear names like The Breakfast Club, Dazed and Confused, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and those are all great films and well worth watching. But one of my all-time favorites is Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and I'm going to give some of the reasons for that. First of all, I think this film makes good use of its soundtrack. It's one of the better 80s type soundtracks out there. If you're into this era of music, I think you'll really enjoy it. Also, there's a lot of memorable characters in this film. This movie's only 90 minutes, but it's very fast paced and it packs in a lot of characters. Sean Penn's Jeff Spicoli is probably the most memorable for most people, but all the characters are pretty fleshed out for a movie that's this short. All the main characters, anyway, they all have their own story arcs and are all pretty interesting. This is one of those films that's kind of just about a whole bunch of high schoolers. There's not one overall plot. There's a lot of different themes that are kind of weaved together, and it works very well. This film is mostly a comedy, but it does tackle some pretty serious issues, a lot of which are still pretty relevant today, actually. The film blends comedy and drama well. It mixes in the dramatic scenes very well. They never seem forced in or overdone. And that's probably because the characters do feel so realistic. They're likable enough and charming enough, but the characters do have flaws that are believable. They don't feel contrived. Everything about the narratives in this film works very, very well. There are also some very popular and known scenes in this movie. I'll just say look for a pool scene and a pizza scene, which are memorable for very different reasons. I'll leave it at that. So I will say I just have a few slight issues with this film. The film is slightly dated in a few areas. Some of the humor doesn't quite all hold up. A lot of it does. But there's a few things here and there that don't totally work. And the film is very much of its time. If you didn't grow up in this era of the 80s or go to high school during this time period, it might be a bit harder to relate to the film. Like I said, some things are still pretty relatable, but there are some pop culture references in this film that are definitely very dated and very of the times. But overall, Fast Times at Ridgemont High is a very likable film with a great soundtrack, like I said, especially if you're into music from this era. The acting is also really good in this film for the most part. Sean Penn is really good, and Jennifer Jason Leigh is extremely good in this film, in my opinion, and the whole supporting cast does fine. So overall, Fast Times at Ridgemont High is definitely a classic that I recommend, especially if you like these type of teenage high school comedy dramas, and I'm going to give it a 4.5 out of 5. Like I said, a few dated elements, but overall an excellent film that I recommend. So 4.5 out of 5 for Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and as always, thank you very much for watching.